perfect way and keeping all the aspects in control. Today, while we start with this great series, and we will look forward to all your cooperations and glued attention to it. The series which it starts is CEO and HR then and now, the change of guard, the change of expectation, and the change of responsibilities. Team Sampark is a trust based out in Calcutta. We have chapters in Mumbai and Delhi, and we have over 400 members. You don't have to be great to start, but your start needs to be great. With this tagline, while we humbly take a baby step to move forward this series, we have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Ajit Menon, who is the CEO of PGIM India Asset Management Private Limited. Mr. Ajit is a stalwart in himself. He has been associated with Sampark earlier as well. He was one of our keynote speakers in the financial wellness session in Calcutta in 8th of February this month. Mr. Menon, while I've interacted a couple of times with him, and what I could gain that human resources isn't the thing we do, it is the thing that runs our business. That is what his thought process comes when we talk about HR, specifically whatever little discussions I have with him in terms of HR. Mr. Menon is the Chief Executive Officer of PGI India Asset Management Private Limited. As a CEO, Mr. Ajit oversees all the aspects of asset management business, including mutual fund, portfolio management services. Mr. Ajit is also responsible for giving direction to the business and his growth strategy. He is a dynamic and result-oriented leader, brings in keen insights and having a team player approach. As an industry veteran, Mr. Ajit has experience over 2 decades of leadership in business strategy, distribution, sales, and marketing. He joined PGIM India from Tata Asset Management Company, where he was the head of strategy. Prior to Tata AMC, Mr. Ajit spent 15 years with DSP BlackRock, where he played a key role of the growth of the business. He is associated with key industry bodies and a sought-after speaker to various domestic forums and conferences. He has authored papers on matters pertaining to MC business, co-designed a 6-month course, and also a 2-month retirement readiness certification course for the business partners. This session, we are also coming across as a co-partnership with Suskan's Consultants Private Limited, our financial wellness partner. Our relationship with Suskan goes back over a year now, and we hope to bring more such sessions in partnership for all the participants. Mr. Menon, while we start with this session, and we are all keen to know your insights.
Sure.
The first thing which, especially when we have a CEO on the table, we always think, as a leader, especially, who is leading a business, who is leading from forefront. As a leader, it is not important to see your success, but to see success of others. With this tagline, my first question to you and know your insight is, what do you mean by leadership, and how does an effective leader manage crisis?
Well, I think that we've all grown up, with our experiences on different definitions of leadership. And to me, whatever we learned in MBA school about leadership, and knowing how many of the tenets of leadership come from the army into the management world, it is seemingly very hierarchical. It is seemingly very power-centric, powerful people. Those are the definitions that come in front of us, leading from the front, and things like that are the definitions that come from us for us on leadership. My experience tells me, and having managed a couple of crises, is that leadership is situational, definitely situational. And I think as HR managers, almost every HR manager understands this pretty intuitively, that leadership is situational, and there are different times that a leader will need to play different roles. And every individual in the organization, in that sense, can actually be a leader, defining and doing something much beyond just the KRA that we all sort of define at the beginning of the year. So, so I think that, what is happening, and this is something that I shared during the Sampark event that we did in Calcutta, which is that, the world is changing for sure. And that was even before the coronavirus crisis. I think over hundreds and hundreds of years, we moved in, from a corporate or from a adult skill perspective, we've moved from needing only physical skills during the agricultural economy of the olden ages to more mental and physical skills when it came to the industrial era. And then it became the knowledge era, or everything to do with the internet, where your physical skills was just not required. All you need was your intellectual skills if you needed to survive and if you needed to succeed in the internet or the knowledge led economy. I think a lot of people who watch the evolution of business have been talking about business evolving into a different state. And that is a state in which your physical strength may not be as required, your intellectual strength may not be as required. What will be required will be the strengths of your heart and everything to do with the heart. And I'm talking about empathy, for instance. And I'm talking about everything that comes from the heart. So you saw the agricultural economy, the industrial economy, the knowledge and internet economy, and we are moving into something called the human economy. And so you needed physical strength in the industrial economy, you needed physical and intellectual strength. In the knowledge and internet era, you needed only intellectual strength. And I think now you're getting into a world where you need to be doing things that machines cannot do, that algorithms cannot duplicate, that machine learning and whatever programming we talk about cannot do. And that is not to do with the body or the head, but the heart. And I therefore think that as a leader, the ability to empathize, and design a business around empathy, depending on whichever business that you might be in, is probably going to be the most critical factor that you will require going forward.
I think that was indeed very insightful to know leadership, that you have a gut feeling and you have a heart, especially as a leader. We are into coming out of a pandemic situation. We always assume that different outcomes require new ways of thinking and always lead to old results. My leading question is, how would you analyze the current companies up with the COVID-19, especially financial and hospitality industry? Are the CEOs ready to shift to a war fighting mode?
It's pretty early days actually, because people will behave very, very differently on costs, on people, and on various other factors. Companies that follow an April to March financial year have been taking decisions of reducing increments or eliminating incentives for this year or maybe the next, even cutting people. Companies that are largely multinational and are following calendar years had already paid out their increments and bonuses even before the coronavirus crisis. So, they were in a different space altogether. And therefore, I think there are quite a lot of differences when it comes across companies, not just in the BFSI or the healthcare segment, but across sectors and across companies. I think the way that people are dealing with it is extremely different. But, I think the central aspect is that most business leaders are simply not able to put a finger on how the consumer is going to change, and therefore how their businesses are going to get impacted, and therefore what it's going to mean for their balance sheets and especially the P&L as well. So I would say that the financial services sector already had problems before this crisis. So if you looked at the credit crisis since 2018, public sector banks cleanup was going on since Raghuram Rajan, stepped into the central bank. And it's, even with Urjit Patel and now Shaktikanta Das, those things have only continued. So it's not as if the financial sector was in a crisis only because of the pandemic. They've been in a crisis since the last 3 or 4 years. And, this pandemic is really one more additional crisis to deal with. And therefore, there were a lot of sectors in India that were already going through a crisis before the pandemic. You take airlines, you take SME, you take auto, you take real estate, you take banks and NBFCs. They've all been going through a crisis even before this pandemic. So Therefore, things are going to get a little worse for some of these people. And I think the key that most of us who are watching the economy and markets think is largely in terms of who's got the strong balance sheet, and they're the ones who are going to survive and do things differently, probably grab more market share, take care of their people, and who's got a weak balance sheet. And they're going to have more of the trouble, going forward. Leverage is really a killer. And even before this crisis, strong balance sheet companies with strong cash flows were doing okay. I think those very same companies will continue to do well, post the crisis, and they'll continue to gain sort of market share. So it's going to be very difficult for companies in the middle of the pack in sectors, or at the bottom of the pack. Some of them, and like us, for instance, we are not very large in India. We are large globally as a brand, but not large in India. I think you start adopting a startup mentality. I mean, while we are working in businesses, going to our offices, we only hear these nice little terms of, the startup attitude, the startup mentality, the gig economy, fail fast and move forward, and, those kind of terms. But, in India, out of the 130 crore population we have, the working population is only 47 crore. And of that 47 crore, only 17% are salary. Okay, 83% of Indians are self-employed or are casual laborers. So if we are all earning a salary from an office somewhere, we are part of that. Is what I'm saying. The companies who have strong balance sheets will actually play out much better into this crisis and going forward. They'll be able to grab market share. And for others, the smaller middle ones, I think leaders and HR managers and everywhere will have to rethink the culture of the firm, according to me. A little bit of the aspects of the culture of the firm. I'm not saying a total change in the culture, but certain aspects of the culture to deal with this crisis and what it might mean for employees, what it might mean for consumers and customers. And I think that is where some new learnings will be interesting and exciting to have.
Thank you so much, Sajid, for this insight. While we all understand, and from HRA, moving on to the HR aspect, we generally follow some norms in an organization. Like for me, it will be 3 P's: people, purpose, and productivity. While amid COVID, there are some business shapes which have come out. Like
I'm sorry, Ashish, I lost you. I think you have I lost what the 3 P's were.
Oh, people, purpose, and productivity. People, purpose, and productivity.
Is that what is?
Yeah. So while performance, you can name that. So while all these are the HR terms when we look at into people, but for business amid COVID, there are 3 shapes for business survival which has come. That is B, U, and L. How do you see in terms of the jargoning of these business forms of V, U, L, N, its relevancy and effectively, particularly used in the industries which are heavily impacted, like your hospitality, airlines, and in these industries where there's a lot of impact of COVID, how do you see the relevancy of these shapes and which HR people?
Are you talking about the 3 Ps again? Because sorry, Ashish, there's a lot of disturbance on your internet line, I think, but I couldn't hear what the B, U, and L was that you were referring to.
Yeah, so I talk about 3 Ps. What I'm saying, amid this COVID, there are 3 shapes of the business continuity which has come up in terms of strategy. That is B, vertical, U, and L. While these business forms are kind of jargons which help the business continuity, do you as a part of CEO, when you go back, for the industries specifically which are deeply impacted, like your hospitality, airlines, how do you look at the business continuity of these industries where the impact of COVID has been very high? And what do you advise the HR managers in terms to cope up with this? Because there will be a lot of negative energies.
Sure, I agree, Ashish, but I can advise the HR managers, but at CEO, I can tell you that it will be very critical for the leadership at the top. And in terms of how that leadership at the top takes decisions during this crisis to move the organization forward. It'll be very, very important to do that. Sometimes it may be out of the control of the HR manager if the CEO, as a leader, is thinking completely, differently. So, the entire organization will need to come together in a certain thought process. And like I said, a few things about the organizational culture that might change. And yes, I think HR managers can probably, drive that as well. So to me, I think that when you were talking specifically about the hospitality industry, let me tell you that PGIM, which is Prudential Global Investment Managers, my company, or my parent company in the US, in 2018, they did a study that went back 70 years and looked at events in the economy and markets that were, sharp volatility related events where markets dropped 9% to 30%, like it's dropped this time. And for the last 70 years, and these are global markets, they found about 27 such events where markets had been very volatile and had dropped between 9 and about 30%. And you had, events like World War I in 1918, the Great Depression in 1929, the Second World War in the 1940s. One very interesting aspect that they found is that whenever economies actually go down dramatically, not 5%, 6%, and 10%, but when it goes down 25 and 30%, then the next 3 to 5 years tends to see the maximum innovation that happens in every sector. The maximum innovation, I'll just repeat that. The maximum innovation in every sector tends to happen when economies drop dramatically by 20, 25%. Now, what I mean by that is I think that what CHROs may have to drive within companies, as I mentioned a little earlier, is a few little twists and changes probably to the culture. And, when we talk about things like having an innovative culture, an execution-oriented culture, these are things which the leaders in the organization will probably need to drive. Literally like thinking like a startup. You may be a large organization, you may be a mid-sized organization, you may be a small organization. But all of these different sized organizations will probably need to think like startups, because there is definitely going to be impact on the behavior of consumers, the behavior of governments, and the behavior of corporates in your peer group. So that means that you've got to be, sort of ready for it. So I think that, strategies cannot be made on an Excel sheet any longer, at least not now. You'll have to wait 6, 9, 10, 12 months for things to normalize before one can take a call on how things are trending. Data is meaningless. So you look at, what's happening in the last 1 week and 3 weeks and last 1 month and 2 months. And it's meaningless because, you don't know. The impact continues to keep going. Everybody wants the economy to get back out of the rut. And everybody is, if you read experts, they'll talk about V-shaped recoveries, W-shaped recoveries, U-shaped recoveries. And, it's all an alphabet soup of recoveries that people talk about, but nobody knows. So what do you do in this kind of a scenario? I think in this kind of a scenario, one is that, you got to realize that if you're in the services category as an industry, it is people are going to be the heart of your business. And how people do, what people do, how you manage, how you motivate, how you organize them is probably going to be pretty important. So let me give you a few facts and a few thoughts around this that, maybe then you take questions on or things like that. And some of this is coming from PGIM because, being a global organization, we have the advantage of people in so many countries around the world bringing together all these sort of observations and perspectives for us to sort of share. An organization like Twitter is beginning to decide that pretty much a large percentage of their workforce will permanently work from home. Okay. But there are other organizations which are beginning to decide that if the space for one individual in my office was 75 square feet, they're changing that to 300. Okay. So on one side, people think that commercial real estate could get hit very badly because, suddenly offices have realized that, hey, working from home is fine. Why do you need all of these costs and these large offices? And therefore you can shrink the office and reduce your rent and things like that. Now, some of the early research and feedback that is coming from Prudential globally is beginning to suggest that, our office is a very, very prominent part of our lives, of our emotional strengths, of our colleagues, of our friendships, of our coffee machine talks, where we let loose. And this emotional strength that comes in the office, we've never really given it that much importance before this lockdown. Okay, we sort of took this for granted. So there is definitely a certain quality of a person's productivity that's going to come because you recognize that the office is a very integral part of a person's psyche and definition of who I am because of the work that I do, and how it's seen to be done, and my colleagues and everybody else put together, and the whole environment of the office is important. You can't just transport all of that and say it'll happen from home, where if you've just managed to do it for 70 or 80 days. So that's the kind of feedback that is beginning to come, where companies are suddenly realizing, hey, you know what, if people are most important, then 60 square feet per cubicle is not enough. It has to be something like 300, where people come, loosen up. Maybe you could still reduce your office, where you have rotational people working from home coming into office, but there are more recreational areas. You're able to take breaks. Your timings are different, or whatever that is. I don't know. These things are evolving, and HR managers will actually be thinking about this much more. We are thinking about it in PGIM India. I've already asked my HR manager to design a policy around people deciding whatever time they want to come to office. This 9:30 punch in and 5:30 punch out, just doesn't make sense with the peak hour traffic and things like that. And people will not want to travel in crowded trains and crowded, buses to office. So we're saying, you want to come to office at 7:30 and leave at 3:30, by all means, go ahead. Or you want to come to office at 11 and leave at 8:30, fine. As long as your supervisors and the tasks that you need to do, the common meetings that you need to do, there is a window of overlap between all teams so that those activities can get done as well. We're definitely going to be asking people to decide whether they want to work from home one day of the week without even asking their supervisor. But if they ask their supervisor if they want, they can work 2 days of the week from home, if they so wish. And some people might want to do that. So I think a coronavirus that does not respect nationalities or gender or boundaries anywhere in the world, and is affecting, or religion or caste or creed, we're trying to deal with it by actually creating boundaries. And I think the lesson here is that flexibility will possibly be the biggest defining feature of our work lives. And I think to think about flexibility in many different ways is going to be important. Let me also give you another example now to this. India is 29 states, and every state is behaving differently in this crisis, because every chief minister knows that this is a huge election issue the next time around. So even if Prime Minister Modi can take the National Disaster Act or Epidemics Act and decide whatever from the center, what essentially is happening is that, in the states, because the police reports to the state, because the administration reports to the state, every state is having a different progression of flattening the curve and dealing with the virus. So Kerala and Karnataka have done great, Maharashtra and Gujarat have done badly. And therefore, depending on your offices and your people and your branches as to where they are, it could all be very different. I've opened my Cochin office, but I've not been able to open any other office, across the country. And so you're going to suddenly find that there are these differences at the state level in India. So I'm trying to just bring it all to a nutshell to say that what will be very important for CHROs to think about and CEOs to think about is flexibility. Dealing with this virus has taught you that. You've got to be flexible. You've got to be, thinking about your hierarchies very critically. You may not be able to actually operate in a very, very strict hierarchical world. You might need to define a frame of reference and then give a lot more autonomy to people, because your branches in every state will probably have different flexibilities to work. you will need more flexibilities to work with your people. You will need to reskill your people. You need to give them flexibilities in timings. So, I mean, I'll stop there, but I think you get a gist of what I'm trying to say.
That was indeed wonderful, Mr. Ajit. What could I make out is that some of our HR colleagues who are from real estate will have a smile on their face after your session. And, you also bring into a perspective HR and finance together. While we are talking about softer aspects, we also need to understand that, how important is the F word in our life, or M vitamin, as my father always says. So while we take this forward, move from people aspect to a financial aspect, I read somewhere it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. And specifically, all CEOs, follow that. And if you think about that, you will always do things differently. If there is fear of losing your goodwill and whatever you have created over the past. With this tagline, leading question, couple of questions come to my head is that HR leaders specifically, now we are hearing about a lot of companies, laying off or giving pink slips or, cut down salaries. While all these things in HR fraternity, we always think that, whatever reduce the cost of a company should be a manpower cost. But I want to ask you specifically on two things. One is that what HR leaders should do in terms of employee connect and productivity when the unlocking happens. And second, apart from manpower cost, how do you see a business that how industries and other CEOs, can reduce their cost? Because manpower cost is the important aspect, but it cannot be the only aspect where, it is always in the news. Because whenever we see in the news or in the WhatsApp, it's always about manpower. People have been asked to leave. But there are other things also, good things with the organization might be doing to, control the cost. Can you highlight them so that for the larger HR audience, they will feel about that?
Sure. This is a tough one because, in services businesses, BFSI businesses, investment, financial businesses, yes, the people costs are the highest costs in a business. And people tend to think that, that's the first cost that, you need to control, manage or cut. It might be a reality. Some may have to do it, but I think it's important not to be trigger happy. Some people may just feel like some businesses, some leaders and CEOs might just feel that, that's, there is no sight in terms of business when things are going to come back, when economies are going to come back. So let's cut now. And, otherwise, this is going to be tough for us. And I think that this has also got to do with the fact that, this quarterly results, especially if you're a listed company, and if you are doing quarterly results, this quarterly results culture has created a type of corporate where the humanness of people has been lost. It's a very Western concept, obviously, that, you got to declare and give your guidance in earnings every quarter. The market is going to watch you. Your share price is going to react to it. And a lot of people have ESOPs at the senior level. So all you're trying to do is to manage that. And in that, the human aspect has taken a back seat. I can tell you that even before this crisis, capitalism and models of capitalism have been, there's beginning to be a wave of people questioning whether capitalism and globalization gave us all the benefits that we wanted, or did it sort of go wrong somewhere in between and took a wrong turn where it lost the humanness as far as employees and people are concerned. You can see that as capitalism took off, unions obviously lost power of negotiation. And even that has meant that there has been a less equitable sharing of the wealth, even within an organization, between the CEO and the lowest man on the chain, or the average of the firm. So especially in developed countries, the CEO pay on an average has gone multiples and multiples above the average pay for a firm. And that sort of inequality that has got created has probably led to more problems even before this coronavirus crisis. And I think there's a lot more people talking about it. I'm only sort of referencing that as a context when I talk about, what are the decisions to take as far as people, salaries, incentives, and things are concerned. In our own firm, we paid up increments and we paid up bonuses this year. We intend to hold it at the same for next year, but it's an open conversation to say, let's take a call towards the closer to the end of the year, but we do definitely want to signal to people that we want to hold it. Now, what it means is that we are trying to find that if our bonus and increment pool was, just to give you an example, a 3 crores out of a total, 30 crore total book of expenses, then we're trying to save 3 crores somewhere else so that we can keep this 3 crore intact as much as possible. For instance, we have to travel quite a lot and leaders have to travel quite a lot. And we are suddenly finding that, okay, doing digital meetings is not bad. Yes, we will still need to do face-to-face when things normalize, but maybe we can cut it down by 50%. Okay, travel costs are something that are in the radar. Then we're looking at our office. And like I was discussing earlier, there is definitely potential for us to reduce costs on the office. It doesn't mean necessarily that, we will want to reduce space. We might want to split the office into multiple pieces rather than having it in one location, have it in multiple locations so that, certain crises are better managed. And you have, 10-man teams or 15-man teams sitting in one, maybe the bulk of 40 people sitting in one and the other 20 people sitting elsewhere. And some of it could be shared office and some of it could be an owned office and things like that. So office infrastructure definitely has space in it to try and do. But I think, Ashish, the way that I'm approaching this is that if you're a good leader, you need to be thinking about increasing revenue as well while you're thinking about reducing cost. Okay. Now, yes, I understand that because the demand has fallen off, the total revenue, is not going to hold up like it was last year. Big deal. You're going to probably make lesser profits because of that. But I think you cannot avoid thinking about increasing your revenue from wherever you were, at the same time, optimizing your cost. I won't say just cutting costs, but optimizing costs. Now, let's assume that you do all of this and you're still left with a gap, and that gap can only be filled with, cutting people or something to do with people. In PGIM, the way we are thinking about it is that if at all we reach that situation, and this is an open discussion, there's a lot of transparency around this, it'll be the senior people who will take the chop first in terms of taking zero increment or zero bonuses. But for a level of maybe AVP and below, we will, sort of keep it protected. Because clearly, people who are higher than AVP or maybe VP and below, we'll keep it the same, and only above VP, we will cut it. So it'll go out in phases. We haven't taken a decision on anything as yet. I still feel confident that we'll be able to hold what we did this year. I must admit that this year the increments were lower, but increments per se have always had a sort of connection with inflation. And inflation being low, it is still okay to do that, but it's the incentive and bonuses that, we worked on. So we sort of deferred some bit of the incentives in the sense that, and that was a decision taken before COVID, where, we looked at some long-term incentive plans to say that, okay, if you were getting bonuses which were 30% of your fixed salary, then going forward, we're going to give you 15% or 20% of the fixed salary. And the balance 10 and 15%, we will put it into an LTIP, which is your long-term incentive plan, which will vest after 3 years or vest after 4 years. And that could be a multiplier on it if the business does pick up reasonably well. So you're only provisioning for it, but you're going to be paying it up much later, not paying it if the person quits. But then you design it that way. So yes, there's going to be a lot of designing around costs and people that one will need to do. I think the worst case scenario would be to lose jobs. My sense is that, I think it would still be best to say zero increment and zero bonus before you decide to take people off the payroll completely. And I think, what we are also finding is that people love to double hat, and, motivating people during these times, especially if you're thinking about saying that, incomes will get probably impacted, is a difficult one, but it can be done. I think it can be done. I don't think that that's a big challenge. It's really up to the leadership.
Thank you so much. You gave a lot of good insights for the HR leaders. What I could make out as a summation is that you were trying to say, so strategically and reap abundantly. That is what you were trying to, and we were trying to take it out from here. It's also important in new normal when we have heard this term in new normal, and this is a lot of spoken about it. Specifically, many companies, a very direct question, since you talked about an employment of terms, many companies might have given a pay slip, and some people, have been kept without pay. The organizations who could not cope up to payment. As a CEO, what do you suggest? Is a pink slip better to keep people on roll without pay?
Well, I don't think that it's a easy choice to make, to say that you either cut the people altogether, or you keep without pay. Because let me tell you this: the biggest impact of COVID-19 is mental health. It's not the fact that you're getting infected and you have 380,000 people who have died. I think more people are dying sitting at home just because of anxiousness and fear. And that fear is not just in the people who are working. The fear is in their families, because they're hearing that jobs can be lost, and that the sole breadwinner of the family can probably lose the job. And then there's no vision, or there's no foresight in terms of when will they get another job back and the incomes back. So I think that leaders need to recognize that this is extremely, extremely sensitive as a time. This is not somebody's fault in terms of, having done it. And so trying to take very black and white decisions on cutting people, I would say, would not be my first, second, third, fourth, or fifth option. And I think you've got to start thinking that way, that if it is about cutting people, if it is about really letting people go, that's going to be my 10th option. And I'm going to come up with 9 options before I reach the 10th. I don't think you need to be trigger happy about saying that, well, this is it. This is what others are doing, so there's no harm, and let's do it. It's a very, very sensitive time for people, and building loyalties, on people, service businesses, which are dependent on people, because we got to think about the families as well at the back end. And Prudential, for instance, PGIM, one of the decisions it took early March was to declare that it will not lay off a single employee worldwide for FY21. And it sent an information to people like me, the CEO of the India business, to make that announcement to employees in the town hall. Call a town hall and make the announcement that PGIM will not lay off a single person in FY21. Now, I know a lot of people messaged me after that call saying that their families were happy. Even before they said that, we are happy that you said it, sir, and, we were all very anxious at home and things like that. They messaged saying that their fathers were happy, their wives were happy, their in-laws were happy who were staying with them, because they were all worried. And, the kind of joy and the sort of motivation that they put into the job after that, the kind of responses I was seeing on sales review meetings and other meetings was something else. They were going beyond their KRAs to say, "Theek hai, sir, if you can, walk the talk and, walk two steps, we'll walk 5 steps and we'll do it." I mean, that's the kind of response that I saw in people's just simple attitude. I mean, they were brightening up, and so sometimes it's the small things to think about. And I would say that, if it's a decision about pink slips and stuff, I mean, force yourself to say that that's going to be your 20th option, and think of 19 of them before you get to that 20, and that's the way to think about it. Sometimes it might be just, inevitable. And, we saw Airbnb, for instance, put out a very touching message to a lot of people that they had to lay off almost 1,900. And the organization decided to do a talent directory on the website and give very good references for every individual, other colleagues who hadn't lost their job, talking about those who had, about their skill sets and things like that, to help them get jobs, and, not just making it a sort of black and white thing. So going back to the first point that I made in the seminar, I think that the winners of the future as leaders, whether they are CHROs, whether they are CEOs, whether they are organizations, are going to be those that have high empathy. This is time to be sensitive. This is time to use empathy while taking many of those rational decisions. And I think those will be the organizations that will win.
Great. I think that's indeed one of the best advice which you have given. As HR leaders, we always used to feel, it's about human resources. human capital, we all move from transformation, automation. But today, coming from you, it is that human touch is very important aspect, and as coming from specifically from a business leader, that it is so important for us. While we also talk about it, also reminds me of one of the saying that the world is changing very fast, and big will not beat small anyone. It will be the fast beating the slow. As also I could narrate, while you were saying that we need to rethink and redesign. Also, very important aspect of now focus on business is automation. While when we talk about automation in any of the departments, whether be it in HR or any other department, it comes with a cost. And while we are also forced and now adapting, India is forced and now adapting the COVID situation and working from home culture, digitalization. While we do all these aspects in an organization, it comes with a cost, especially the
Correct.
automation. So, as a CEO, if you get an option in terms, how other CEOs think in terms that if they get a proposal that you have to invest say X amount, when already you know that something is not going correct. But for automation, for advancement, you require investment. Do you believe this is the time where people, even though they are hit by the financial, they should take that hit and go ahead and invest in automation? Because most of the HR leaders which have spoken, they have come back and told that their business leaders are hesitant on terms of investment, especially at the time of crisis period.
I mean, investments in general during a crisis period, leaders will need to think 10 times. Okay. We had a digital transformation project at PGIM India, which I've completely scrapped 1 month ago. Okay. And the reason I've scrapped it is not because I don't understand that digital is going to be critical for the future. The reason I scrapped it is because I was looking at obviously areas to save money, at the same time look at areas which are critical. I think nothing like a crisis to make your mind crystal clear and sharp as a knife in terms of thinking, what is it that is going to actually make a difference to your business's revenue? Okay. So think about it. I mean, we were thinking about all our sales, CRM and things like that. And we are a small organization with about 60, retail salespeople. Okay. Now these 60 salespeople roll up into team leaders and regional heads, and we have about 4 regional heads. We are absolutely comfortable doing our sales what you call reporting on Excel. And I don't need a 30 lakh CRM. I'm not a 500 man organization, right? When I get to a 500, it'll be very important for me to make sure that all the data that I want is really coming up and I can get some sharp insights. But with 60 people split into 4 zones with 4 regional heads, with a sales head and, with a hierarchy on top of it, it's not difficult to just get an Excel sheet and get a review doing every week with 5, 10 people, because like I said, I'm not a 500 man organization. So I scrapped one part of that project. So I think the way to think about digital is that words like digital transformation and all of this are very sexy, but they're, according to me, utterly useless. I think as leaders, you need to be thinking about where does digital actually make a difference in terms of improving the experience of the customer. And it is actually in customer touching areas that you must be thinking about digitizing first before trying to think about some huge digital transformation project just because the coronavirus crisis has meant that everything should be digital. I think that will be a wrong approach. You need to be even more clear of the specific areas where that digital is going to help. And I think that you need to start with the customer. If the customer can see a difference in the experience he or she has with your brand because of something you're doing in digital, worth the investment. But if the customer is not able to see it, I don't think you need that investment right now. You may need it 12 months later, but you can do without that cost right now. So I think thinking about digital is an important one. Thinking about everything is really important one during a crisis. But that's my take as far as digital is concerned. I don't think digital is going away. It's become pretty much infrastructure for all of us. 4G is going to go to 5G, and there's going to be a lot more. And costs are going to be driven down. So there's no point in committing to platforms and things like that today because things will change quite fast. So it's better to think about the customer, better to think about that touch point with the customer or distributor where if you invest in some digital, it'll make a big difference. Do it. Otherwise, delay it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ajit. I think that was indeed insightful, and it also is a point for us as HR leaders when we take a proposal, check on its viability, that how important is it for the organization and what does it bring to the table. Yeah. While we also move ahead, and bring to the end of the session, so we'll take some audience questions. Some audience have maybe come back and told me in private chat that CEO should start thinking like you. Our CEO does not think like us. So, that's something which also to the point, I realize that when more is required of you, you are capable of increase your capabilities. Why you won't do that? Understanding self-introspect at what you need to do. As a CEO, very important when you stand on the dais, do a town hall or do a webinar, everybody has goosebumps. How do you motivate your team, specifically the sales people, as you talked about sales? What do you do to motivate your people, apart from the human touch as you spoke about, but what do you do to motivate? Like when a CEO stands tall, everybody is, energized, peppy, on their toes. But what do you do differently to motivate the entire team?
You see, one of the lessons that I learned very early in my career, and I have 26 years of it, and I'm probably lucky that I had some good bosses along the way. The first lesson that I learned is culture of the organization is everything. You can have the best strategy in the world. You can have the best brand in the world. You can have the best whatever in the world. You don't have a good culture in the firm and you're going to fail. So building a good culture has always been step one. Now, how do you build a good culture, right? It's about values, beliefs, and behavior. Values are inherent in the firm, and some of it will be passed down from the brand as such. But beliefs and behavior are what leaders run. It's the kind of belief that you give to your people that will get you the behavior. If I tell people, or if I give the impression to people that, hey, you know what, you didn't get into the office before 9:30. We were all here and you came in like 9:45. That's not done. You're going to get people who think that that's important and not the job. Correct? So if you create the belief that, this organization is all about discipline, and, if you don't come in at 9 o'clock, it means, but who the hell is looking at work, effectiveness of work, productivity, so you've got to be a little balanced about what beliefs as a organization, as a CEO, that are you creating, because that's the behavior you're going to get. Now, in my business, what I've realized is that in my own experience of running teams for these 26 years has told me that trust is really the foundation of every relationship. Okay, one, as a boss, as a leader, you need to be a likable person at the very base. You just got to be a likable guy or a girl, whoever you are. And two is that, as a leader, you need to be realizing that you don't know everything. Right? Your team actually knows, and sometimes the junior most person comes up with this brilliant insight. That sort of is something that you can accept and go forward as well, and not say that I know everything. So this whole issue about I know everything in leaders is actually a recipe for a little bit of a disaster. I think this is the time where you realize that insights need to come from the ground, from different sets of people. They may be junior, they may be middle level, they may be senior level. So you need to have that. And the one factor that I use when I'm talking to my sales teams is transparency, therefore. Okay. I like to be as transparent as I can. I like to tell people, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to pan out, but here's what I think it is possible. Scenario 1, scenario 2. So let's go for the one that we think is the most optimistic one. And I think people can very clearly see intent when you speak. Even if you're not on a video call and you're simply on an audio call where you can't see the person's body language or face, just by hearing a person, I think people are tuned to know the intent. And your intent needs to be clear and you need to be transparent. So for me, I think as a leader, transparency is something that I operate on as a platform. I'm not shy of saying I don't know some crap about my business when somebody else knows it much better than I, and let them take it over and lead it. I love to learn. I love to grow. I love to let people know that they can grow on their own. and be flexible about it. I don't have false expectations of that you need to be office at 9:15 and you need to, you can go at 5:30. If you do that, people are going to do that. They're not going to give you extra at all. So I think that to me, Ashish, that is what I try and do when I'm motivating. I try and make my intent very clear. I set my expectations very clearly, and I'm as transparent as I can be.
I forgot that I was speaking to a CEO. I thought I was speaking to a CHRO. So, you pointed out, which I could summarize, that relationships can be broken, not connections. And the value which you bring in terms. The last question of this session before we end, and I hope I have incorporated all the questions which the audience would have put it up. Right. Very importantly, which HR leaders again trouble is change management. Right. While situations will be adverse, there will be pro, there will be cons. What we have come back as HR leaders, when we go back to CEOs, everybody wants change, but willingness to change is very less. What do you advise? We might not be, most of us might not be as lucky to get you as a CEO who can accept, and embrace change. But what happens to you when there is rigidity to accept change, having no prejudice? But there are cases where we have all come across that people are resistant to change. What do you advise to HR leaders specifically, that how do they put forward and bring a change? Because we always want a change, but the change has to be from top to bottom. It cannot be a bottom to top approach. What do you...
Okay. I did tell you that we are getting into a world where empathy is going to define and be the definitive success factor for a leader. Okay. Ideally, CEOs are supposed to understand this intuitively and work with empathy. But the responsibility or the ownership of the word empathy is actually with the CHRO. Because it's CHROs who are, accountable for talent and the people resources, their engagement, their motivation, their development, all of it. Right? They're representative of the people, really. And I think that if you think about a couple of things about this coronavirus, at least these are lessons that I'm taking away. Let's look at it. There is no pope, there's no priest, there's no mullah, there's no pandit who is in charge right now. It's the scientist who's in charge. Correct? To me, the lesson, therefore, is that whatever you're doing, go deep into the science of it. This is the time to become the scientist of your profession, right? And therefore, as a CHRO, I would say that to understand the science of people's motivation, the science of people's strengths and weaknesses, the science of what teams are going to begin, probably going to work together, who has the skill sets, whose personality types are the ones who can take this crisis and run forward, who are the ones who are likely to be rigid and hierarchical and probably find a struggle, and how do I help those people? I'm not saying how do you let go of those people, but help those people. So here's a project that I've started in PGIM. The first thing I told my head of HR is I want her to be certified in understanding how to evaluate every single leader in the firm or every single employee eventually, okay, on personality traits and on strengths and weaknesses, whether it be MBTI tools or whether it be, Hogan or whatever it is that you need to deal with. But you get into the science of it. You let people know that here's what you're going to, in a crisis, this is your personality type. This is what you're likely to be biased towards and for. And then the CHRO and the CEO works together to say, here's the kind of teams that will potentially be doing the best. And then you start finding weaknesses in the team as well, very quickly. And you try and train to eliminate those weaknesses. So to me, I think going into the science of the profession is the best. I mean, even with financial advisors, to tell them that they got to be digging into the science of risk management today, because that is the role that they play. So how do you become the scientist in all of this? And so that's the approach that I would advise as far as change is concerned to take. That is lesson number one. Lesson number two is that we are all becoming a lot more local rather than global. So if you think about it, this is the first crisis where there is no international leader who's the face of this crisis, or standing up and coordinating everybody. There's no Obama. And the one fellow that we have, nobody trusts him, Trump, right? And so if you think about it, what's happened is that again, globalization, the capitalist way of doing things, whatever you may call it, the inequality that has risen between the rich and the poor and the haves and the have-nots is such that it is changing political conversations and political outcomes all across the world. So you get a person like Trump who says, I'll build a wall and keep the Mexicans out. You get a Boris Johnson who says, I'll take UK out of Brexit so that my immigrants will not come to UK to take away our jobs. And it's happening all over the world. And therefore, what you're seeing is globalization is sort of imploding and becoming nationalist. Everybody's becoming nationalist. My country, and in this crisis, that's got taken to a different level. My society, okay, the rules of your society is what matters. Your life, your mental stuff is, whether your, management committee in the building allows you to come down for a morning walk or does not allow you. It allows you to get your pet down or doesn't allow you. Forget about DMs, municipality and the others. So I'm just extending it to organizations to say that this is the time to really unleash the power of the local. So if CHROs can think about, how do you put small teams together at different, geographies of people, let them come up with ideas, let them be innovative, let them fail fast, let them, build sort of mechanisms by which, there are small teams competing with each other all over, just like a startup. As I was talking right in the beginning, that startup mentality, whether you're a large, mid or a small organization, think about the processes that might potentially be like a startup. And that's probably something that will, go forward. I was presenting to an organization, to the entire leadership of an organization 1 week ago. It was a financial services business in the broking sort of sector. And they're 30 years old. As an organization, and they still defined themselves on that video call as a 30-year-old startup. Okay, their senior leaders have Shark Tank in the office, where small groups of employees come and pitch their ideas, and then based on the 15 or 20 pitches that come from the various employees, various mixed groups, 4 projects are taken up every year and are funded by the management to move the business forward. And it's a proper Shark Tank that they do, right? And this organization was doing about 15,000 transactions last March. That's March 2019. This March was obviously a complete shutdown period. They did 1 lakh transactions this March. Now, I'm just saying this is the culture of the firm that they built. It's a big firm. It's 30 years old, but they still define themselves as a startup. And they do things like Shark Tank to keep employees motivated, to bring new projects that are, really specific to certain goals of client and business. And they fund it, and employees just feel a different sense of purpose, when that happens. So I think I must have spoken quite a lot. So I'll stop there.
So much, I think, we could have gone and gone, but it's so it's important, which you realize that the change should come from within, and different outcomes require different ways of thinking. Old way always leads to old results. While we, on this note, we understand that change should come from the CEO in terms of thought process, and HR can be an enabler to that process. We also have an audience where a lot of there are students and some have come back to ask me a question. We have been, hovering our discussion around corporates and employment. What do you in terms of students, specifically those who are appearing the final year where the campus interviews are uncertain, how these young people who will take the baton forward of our Indian economy, how they, can take this opportunity? What advice do you give them, the final year students, specifically the management students who will be, eyeing a campus interview, going into the corporate? So what do you see after this COVID situation for them?
Obviously, there have always been times in the past where there's this one batch of students who get hit, unfortunately, by some massive economic crisis. And it sort of becomes extremely difficult to get the right kind of jobs, or even if you get it, you're on contract or you're on probation, or your salaries are much lower than what others have. or what was earlier promised. Today, I do hear from people that more organizations have pulled out offers which they had given earlier, even in large institutes like the IIMs and things like that. So I think that it's not going to be easy for a batch that comes out and gets out in this year when they think about their careers forward. But to me, there is always a silver lining, right? When there are dark clouds, you've got to be looking for the silver lining. So I think that what I would advise students is that, you've got to be looking for the silver lining here. The silver lining here is that suddenly everything that everybody knew and learned is useless. So everybody is on square one. And you have an opportunity where you don't necessarily now need to say that, I have 20 years of experience. It's bullshit. I mean, people who have 20 years of experience or 25 don't know what the hell to do in this crisis. All of what they learned, or at least 60 or 70% of what they learned, is just not proving to be useful. Maybe 20, 30% of what they learned is relevant. All experience never goes away. That doesn't become useless. I will not say that for sure. That'd be too much. But when I have recruited people and I've interviewed people, and I have two candidates who have, who both have worked for 10 years, I find that one person has got 10 years of experience and the other person has 1 year of experience multiplied by 10. Useless, really. So as a student this year, as you pass out, I think that a lot of people who have already been in the corporate world for the last 10 years or 15 years are probably on the same square as you are. So if you need to therefore, be thinking about what is it that you can make a difference for, I think you need to step up your game dramatically. I mean, whatever you have thought about the usual process of getting a job or doing something is not going to be useful in this, going through colleges and doing what you have to do. You will need to pitch yourself differently to corporates in areas that you're passionate about. If you need to go tell people that, listen, you're going to work for 3 months for free, but you're going to get some results going on the ground. And then post that, they can take a decision whether they want to, absorb you, on the roles or not. I mean, that kind of attitude, I would love it, to see that. So I would say that, of course, organizations would have their requirements or not have their requirements. But all I'm saying is that there is a silver lining to all the dark clouds that you may have here. A lot of people who already have experience are finding that much of their experience is of no use. So you are on the same square as they are. So you have exactly the same chance as a guy with 10 years of experience to get your next profile and move quickly and far ahead. But that would mean a lot of change in the way that you approach things. And between attitude, skills, and knowledge, which are the three probably pillars of, three pillars for any individual as they think of themselves. I think, skills, yes, important. Knowledge, yes, important. But attitude is probably going to make the difference in the next couple of months and a couple of years. So work on that.
Mr. Ajit, I think that was indeed very insightful for our students, because at this point, since they all are looking forward, some of them might be panic. So this kind of advice will really help them, because they also need to change their attitude in terms, how they have been expecting. So right. In terms, what I can say, while we come and end of the session, I've taken most of the questions from the audience as well. And with this closure, it's a very heavy heart, I have to say, a closure. But, while I was discussing with you at a point, we started the candid discussion. Then it became, as we are sitting across the table and we're discussing in terms of a future of a business, in terms of people, employees, and then students. So what I would take away, 3 important things from your discussion is that we business now, the foundation is empathy, which was finance or culture, is empathy. At this situation, it will continue for next 6 months. Second important thing is that we as HR leaders should go back and, should not stop trying. Even if, we do not find a success in the first pitch, we should keep on going, because the change management is a slow and effective process. It might not see the results. Also take the proposals to the CEO which are more relevant. Do not take as an example of 500 manpower and in terms we take a proposal which is not relevant. And most importantly is that our attitude towards your thing. You are a delight to have as a CEO to PGIM, and most of the people who have been messaging me would have been thinking that our CEO should also be like Mr. Menon. Thank you so much, Mr. Menon, for being with us, and you have really put forward and given us the right kind of thought process to start with this series. We always, when we talk to CEOs, we have a inhibition. We are self-modulated, muddle that what the CEO will think. He will always talk about money. But in spite of you spoke about HR. The most of the 90% of the discussions was about HR. Team Sampark really, is indeed happy and indeed privileged to have you as one of your maiden speaker for this series. We hope to have you back, and people will connect back to you on personally to know more insight, because the entire mechanism of CEO, which the impression which we had, you have really shattered it and brought out right the best way out of it. Thank you so much, Mr. Menon, for having and giving your important time to us. Also, somebody commented, Mr. Pramod sir has commented you are a CEO and a CHRO in there. Thank you so much. And I thank all the participants. I thank Kanakji and Saurabhji to come together and do this. While we extend this session, I think most of us will realize that the thought process of a CEO, you need to get into the shoes and accept and understand. You cannot, you cannot just think, you need different hats when we say. You also need to step into other shoes and start thinking that what their expectation or their idea about the business operation is. Thank you so much,
Thanks, Ashish.
Menon. Thank you so much. It was indeed pleasure to interact with you again.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Kanak. Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.